So let's go ahead and get started on our topic for today. And I want to start with you, Greg. Greg, what is Title IX and how did it come to be?
Yeah, well, thanks, Don. Well, Title IX is a federal statute. It forbids sex discrimination, not by everybody, just by education programs and activities that receive federal financial assistance. We just passed the 52nd anniversary of the signing of Title IX, so it was 1972. One of the key things to understand about Title IX is the statute is pretty straightforward. It says, if you're a school that gets money from the federal government, you can't discriminate on the basis of sex. And of course, this was a response to discrimination that was happening back then in the admissions context and athletic context and others. But in addition to the sort of straightforward command or prohibition of the statute, the Department of Education, which is primarily responsible for enforcing Title IX, has adopted a pretty significant amount of regulations and guidance that they've issued to entities that get federal funding and are thus subject to Title IX. So, there's more out there than just the statute itself.
Well, let's jump right into these key changes. So we heard from a lot of organizations right around that time in April when these came out that, well, what does this mean for us? How does this work? What's actually in the new regulations?
Yeah, so the headline that a lot of us saw and that were part of ADF's public response to the publication of the final rule focused on the rule's declaration that its ban on sex discrimination reaches discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. To be fair, that was not the focus or the emphasis of the rule as a whole. When the department decided to revisit existing regulations, they did so primarily to make changes to those parts of the regulation implementing Title IX that deal with sexual assault and sexual harassment, specifically how schools that are covered by Title IX are supposed to respond when someone complains of being sexually assaulted or sexually harassed. There are a lot of existing regulations about the proper process, the kind of support that a school needs to give to someone who complains, the burden of proof that needs to be deployed when you're trying to decide whether someone has violated Title IX. So a lot of the rule deals with that. But as I mentioned at the outset, yes, it does declare that Title IX's ban on sex discrimination reaches discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. It's worth noting that this is not a new idea. I think it goes back as far as 2013, where the Department of Education has been taking this position and engaging in enforcement actions consistent with that position, issuing sub-regulatory guidance, not formal rules and regulations, that embrace this view. One other significant thing to note about the new regulation is something it doesn't do. It does not change the existing regulations about Title IX's religious exemption. The exemption, as we'll see during the course of our discussion, will become an important part of our conversation today. The exemption is right there in the statute from the beginning, and the department has adopted regulations that are very helpful and very good for religious educational institutions. And there were a lot of calls on the Biden administration to sort of diminish the protectiveness of these rules. And I'm happy to report that the Department of Education under the Biden administration rejected calls to withdraw or otherwise change those exemption regulations.